The sun was setting as I walked into the baseball stadium, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. I always loved the feeling of anticipation that hung in the air before a game. The smell of popcorn and hot dogs, the sound of vendors calling out, and the sight of families finding their seats always made me feel at home. I found my seat near the outfield, ready for an evening of America's favorite pastime. The game started smoothly, and I got lost in the rhythm of the innings. The crack of the bat, the cheer of the crowd, and the occasional groan when a player struck out were the soundtrack of the evening. I was deeply engrossed in the game when I noticed something strange. It was during the fifth inning, and the sun had almost disappeared, leaving the sky a deep blue with the first stars beginning to twinkle. I was looking toward the outfield when I saw a shadow move across the sky. At first I thought it was a bird, but it seemed too big. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. The shadow grew closer, and I realized it was not a bird but something much larger. It had wings, yes, but they were broad and bat-like, not feathery. The creature flew closer, and I could see it more clearly now. Its eyes glowed a bright red, almost as if they were burning coals. My heart started pounding in my chest. I had heard stories of strange creatures, but I never believed them. Yet here it was, right in front of me. The creature swooped low over the field, and I could see the players looking up, confused. It was as if time had slowed down, and everything was happening in slow motion. The creature let out a screech. I wanted to run to leave the stadium and never look back, but I was frozen in place. The creature circled the field once more, and then it landed on top of the scoreboard. It was huge, much larger than any person, with a muscular body covered in dark, leathery skin. Its wings were folded behind it, and it perched there like some dark guardian. The crowd had gone silent. Everyone was staring at the creature, unsure of what to do. The players on the field were huddled together, whispering and pointing. The creature's eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment, I felt like it was looking directly at me. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Then suddenly, the creature spread its wings and took off into the night. It flew higher and higher until it was just a dot in the sky, and then it disappeared. The spell was broken, and the stadium erupted in chaos. People were shouting, running for the exits, and trying to make sense of what they had just seen. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had happened. My mind was racing, and my hands were shaking. I looked around and saw others who were just as shocked as I was. Slowly, I got up and made my way to the exit. The game was forgotten. No one cared about the score anymore. All that mattered was this strange creature that had appeared and then vanished. As I walked home, I replayed the event in my mind over and over. What was that creature? Where did it come from? And why did it choose to appear at a baseball game? I had no answers, only more questions. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing red eyes and heard that terrifying screech. In the days that followed, the story of the creature spread like wildfire. News stations, newspapers, and social media were all abuzz with accounts from those who had been at the game. Some called it the Mothman, a legendary creature said to be a harbinger of doom. Others dismissed it as a prank or a hallucination, but I knew what I had seen was real. I found myself drawn to the stories of the Mothman, reading everything I could find. The more I learned, the more unsettled I became. Sightings of the creature often preceded disasters, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen. I started seeing signs everywhere, little coincidences that fueled my growing paranoia. Despite my fear, I kept going to the baseball games. It was the one place where I felt normal, where I could forget about the creature for a while. But every time I looked up at the scoreboard, I couldn't help but remember that night. My fascination with the ocean had always been profound. As a marine biologist, I had spent countless hours exploring its depths, unraveling its mysteries, and yet there were stories that eluded even the most seasoned scientists. One such story was that of the Kraken, a legendary sea monster said to dwell in the darkest corners of the ocean. Skeptics dismissed it as mere myth, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to the tale. So I embarked on an expedition to find out for myself. It was a foggy morning when we set sail from the coast of Norway. Our vessel, the Nautilus, was equipped with the latest technology in marine exploration. The crew consisted of seasoned sailors and fellow scientists, all of whom shared my curiosity and skepticism. We charted a course towards the Greenland Sea, a place notorious for its treacherous waters and unexplained phenomena. Days turned into weeks as we navigated the icy waters. The deeper we went, the more unsettling the ocean became. The sonar equipment detected strange, massive movements below the surface, but we couldn't pinpoint their source. The crew grew restless, and whispers of the Kraken began to circulate among them. I dismissed their fears as superstition, focusing instead on the data. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a blood-red hue over the sea, we encountered a storm unlike any I had ever seen. The waves towered over our ship, and the wind howled with an eerie, almost sentient fury. The Nautilus groaned under the pressure, and for a moment, I feared we would be swallowed whole by the ocean. Then the storm ceased. The sea calmed, and an unnatural silence fell over us. It was then that we saw it. Rising from the depths, a massive tentacle broke the surface of the water, followed by another, and then another. The creature was unlike anything I had ever seen, a behemoth of the deep, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. This was no myth. The Kraken was real. Panic erupted among the crew. Shouts and screams filled the air as they scrambled to their posts, but it was futile. The Kraken's tentacles wrapped around the Nautilus, squeezing with a force that threatened to crush the ship. I could hear the wood splintering and the metal groaning under the pressure. Amidst the chaos, I grabbed my camera, determined to document the encounter. Through the lens, I captured the Kraken in all its terrifying glory. Its skin was a deep, inky black, and its eyes seemed to bore into my soul. As I filmed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was a creature from the depths of time, a remnant of an ancient world. Suddenly, the ship lurched, and I was thrown to the deck. The Kraken had let go, and we were free. The crew wasted no time in steering the Nautilus away from the beast. As we sped away, I glanced back and saw the Kraken disappearing into the depths, its eyes still glowing, watching us. We made it back to shore, battered but alive. Many dismissed my story as a hoax, while others were captivated by the possibility that the Kraken was real. For me, it was a validation of a lifelong belief that the ocean still held secrets beyond our understanding. As I sit here, reflecting on that harrowing encounter, I can't help but feel a sense of responsibility. The Kraken is a reminder that we are mere visitors in the vast, untamed wilderness of the ocean. There are still mysteries out there, waiting to be discovered, and dangers that lurk in the deep. I continue my work as a marine biologist, driven by the knowledge that there is so much more to learn. The Kraken remains an enigma, a symbol of the unknown, and a testament to the power and majesty of the sea. And while many may never believe my story, I know what I saw. The Kraken is real, and it's out there somewhere in the deep, waiting. Every time I set sail, I carry with me the memory of that night, the fear, the awe, and the exhilaration of witnessing a legend come to life. It serves as a reminder of why I became a marine biologist in the first place, to explore, to discover, and to uncover the secrets of the ocean. The Kraken is more than a cryptid. It is a guardian of the deep, a creature that commands respect and reverence. And it is a part of our world, whether we choose to believe it or not. I remember the day I saw the Pukwui like it was yesterday. It was a sunny afternoon in the countryside. The sky was bright blue and fluffy white clouds floated lazily above. Birds chirped in the trees and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. It was the perfect day for an adventure. I lived in a small house with my family. Our house was surrounded by tall trees, wide fields, and a sparkling stream that flowed nearby. It was a beautiful place, full of life and color. I loved exploring the woods and fields around our home. There was always something new to discover. One afternoon, I decided to take a walk in the woods. I put on my favorite pair of shoes and set off, feeling the soft grass beneath my feet. The woods were cool and shady, with beams of sunlight filtering through the leaves. I walked along a narrow path, listening to the sounds of nature around me. Birds sang their cheerful songs, and I could hear the distant croak of a frog by the stream. As I walked deeper into the woods, I noticed something strange. The trees seemed to grow closer together, and the path became narrower. I had never been this far before. My heart began to beat a little faster, but I was too curious to turn back. I continued walking until I reached a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large rock, covered in moss and surrounded by wildflowers. It looked like a perfect place to rest, so I sat down on the rock and took a deep breath of the fresh, earthy air. As I sat there, something caught my eye. Near the base of a tree, I saw a small figure. It was no taller than my knee and had a round, pudgy body. Its skin was a light gray color, and it had large, dark eyes that seemed to sparkle in the sunlight. It had a tuft of hair on its head and wore a simple cloth wrapped around its body. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the figure was still there, watching me with those big, curious eyes. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I had heard stories about Pukwujis before. They were said to be mischievous creatures that lived in the woods, playing tricks on travelers and hiding in the shadows. But I never thought I would see one myself. The Pukwuji took a step closer, and I held my breath. It moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if it were just as curious about me as I was about it. I stayed very still, not wanting to scare it away. After a few moments, the Pukwuji stopped a few feet away from me. It tilted its head to the side, studying me. I could see its tiny hands, each finger tipped with a small, sharp claw. Its eyes were wide and full of wonder. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This creature didn't seem dangerous. In fact, it seemed almost friendly. I watched as the Pukwuji bent down and picked up a small flower from the ground. It held the flower delicately in its fingers, examining it closely. Then, to my surprise, it looked up at me and smiled. It was a shy, hesitant smile, but it made my heart swell with happiness. For what felt like hours, I sat there watching the Pukwuji. It moved around the clearing, exploring the flowers and rocks. It seemed to enjoy the simple beauty of the woods, just like I did. I felt a connection to this little creature, a bond that went beyond words. Eventually, the Pukwuji looked up at the sky. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the clearing. It was time for me to head back home. I stood up slowly, not wanting to startle the Pukwuji. It watched me with those big dark eyes, and I gave it a small wave before turning to leave. As I walked back through the woods, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The Pukwuji was real, and I had been lucky enough to see one with my own eyes. I felt a sense of wonder and excitement, knowing that there were still so many mysteries in the world waiting to be discovered. When I reached home, I ran inside to tell my family about my adventure. They listened with wide eyes as I described the Pukwuji and the magical clearing in the woods. My parents smiled and nodded, and my siblings looked at me with awe. They believed my story, and that made me feel even more special. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the Pukwuji again. I wondered where it had come from, and if I would ever see it again. I hoped that one day I could return to the clearing and find my little friend waiting for me. My favorite thing in life is going on outdoor adventures with my family. I work hard most of the time, so about once a year it's all worth it. My family and I drive across the country and have a life-changing experience together. A couple of years ago, my wife, our 2 kids, and I were on a road trip when we reached Freetown, Massachusetts. Freetown is known for being a hotspot for all types of paranormal activity. I'm talking Bigfoot, aliens, government conspiracies, ghosts, spirits, time travelers, glitches in the space-time continuum, you name it. I had always heard about these strange sightings, hauntings, and unexplained phenomena in the area, but had never experienced anything out of the ordinary there myself. Anyway, as we were driving through, all our vehicles suddenly began to experience electrical issues at the same time. The lights on my Jeep, my son's car in front of us, and my daughter's car behind started to flicker on and off. The radio turned on and off, the AC, everything. Then, all of a sudden, all three of our cars just stopped working entirely. The engine shut off, and we all slowed to a halt. We pulled over to the side of the road, and none of our cell phones worked. Nothing electronic worked at all. We got out of the cars to figure out what was going on. In the distance, we saw a tall black mass, darker than the night sky, looming. It was so dark that it seemed to absorb any light around it. The mass took the shape of a human and seriously freaked me out. It just stood there in the middle of the road, looking at us. We were all in shock and watched in terror. Then suddenly the black mass disappeared, and all our cars and cell phones turned back on. We looked at each other, completely shocked by what had just happened. After a few moments of silence, my wife suggested we get out of there as fast as possible. We all agreed and jumped back in our cars, trying to put as much distance between us and the black mass as we could. None of us could believe what we had just seen. We kept driving, trying to shake off the experience and get to a safe place. Eventually, we made it to a nearby town and stopped at a gas station to fill up and regroup. We were all shaken up and trying to make sense of what had happened. We talked about all kinds of things. Was it a hoax? Was it just a man in black clothes? Was it some sort of government experiment or secret technology? But deep down, we all knew that what we had seen was beyond human capabilities. We continued down the road and stopped at a hotel after a couple more hours of driving. All of us were exhausted and completely shaken up by the strange black mass that had rendered us immobile. We decided to do some research on the area and the black mass we had witnessed. We figured we couldn't be the only ones who had experienced this. We came across numerous articles and reports of sightings of shadow men in the region known as the Bridgewater Triangle. The Bridgewater Triangle is what they called the surrounding area that includes Freetown, Massachusetts. It is essentially described as a second Bermuda Triangle because of all the unexplained paranormal activity that occurs in the area. People had reported seeing these shadow men lurking in the woods and even in their own homes. There were several accounts of people who had reported physical contact with these shadowy entities, scratches, bites, bruises, and even accounts of these shadow men holding them down as they awakened. As we read more and more accounts of these shadow men, we got increasingly freaked out. It was one thing to have one experience like ours, but the fact that so many people had reported seeing these shadow men made it all the more terrifying. We knew that we had come face to face with something truly evil and did not want to experience it again. The reports we found ranged from recent sightings to those dating back decades. It was clear this was not a new phenomenon. These shadow men had been haunting the area for a long time. We even found stories of Native American legends about dark entities that lurked in the woods and preyed on travelers, which sounded exactly like what we had experienced. As we continued our road trip the next day, we still couldn't help but feel on edge. We kept the radio off and our eyes peeled for any sign of the shadow men. It was a life-changing experience that opened our eyes to the terrifying reality of the paranormal. We knew we would never forget our encounter with the shadow man and had to warn others to be cautious when traveling through the Bridgewater Triangle. Encountering the shadow man in Freetown, Massachusetts, and learning about the phenomenon of shadow men in the Bridgewater Triangle changed our family in many ways. It brought us much closer together and made us realize how fragile and unpredictable life can be. It also opened our minds to the existence of the paranormal and the possibility of otherworldly beings we had never considered before. I've always loved exploring abandoned places. The thrill of walking through deserted buildings, imagining their past, fills me with an eerie sense of nostalgia. But nothing could have prepared me for the experience I had at the old St. Marys Asylum. The asylum had been closed for decades, shrouded in mystery and the subject of countless urban legends. Rumors of mistreatment, experimental procedures, and ghostly apparitions surrounded it. I had heard these stories growing up, and they both fascinated and terrified me. So when I finally got the chance to explore it, I couldn't resist. It was a cold, foggy evening when I arrived at the gates of St. Mary's. The iron gates were rusted and half open, almost inviting me in. The building itself loomed in the distance, its silhouette barely visible through the mist. I took a deep breath, adjusted my backpack, and stepped inside. The crunch of gravel under my boots was the only sound as I made my way up the long, overgrown driveway. The asylum was a massive Gothic structure with ivy creeping up its walls and broken windows that stared back at me like empty eye sockets. I reached the entrance, a grand set of double doors, one of which hung askew on its hinges. Pushing it open, I stepped into the dimly lit foyer. The air inside was musty, carrying the scent of decay and abandonment. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper, shattered tiles, and scattered debris. I ventured deeper, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Each room I passed seemed to tell a story of its own. An old examination room with rusted medical equipment, a dilapidated lounge with tattered furniture, and patient rooms with iron beds that still held remnants of their long-gone occupants. I reached the main staircase, its banister broken in several places. As I ascended, the atmosphere grew colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I reached the second floor, where the patients' quarters were located. The air was thick with a sense of dread, and the silence was almost deafening. As I explored the narrow corridors, I came across a door marked Ward C. It was slightly ajar, and curiosity got the better of me. Pushing it open, I stepped into a large room filled with rows of beds. The moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting an eerie glow on the room. I noticed a small desk in the corner covered in dust and cobwebs. On it lay an old, leather-bound journal. I picked up the journal, blowing off the dust, and opened it. The pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was barely legible. It seemed to belong to a nurse who had worked at the asylum. As I read through the entries, a chilling story began to unfold. The nurse wrote about strange occurrences, patients disappearing, shadowy figures lurking in the hallways, and unexplainable noises that echoed through the night. She mentioned a particular patient, a young girl named Emily, who seemed to be at the center of these events. According to the journal, Emily was admitted under mysterious circumstances and exhibited unusual behavior. She spoke of seeing the darkness and claimed that something was trying to take her. The nurse's last entry was abrupt and frantic, describing how Emily had vanished from her room one night, leaving behind nothing but a trail of blood. A sudden crash jolted me from my reading. I turned towards the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The noise had come from down the hall. Gathering my courage, I followed the sound, my footsteps cautious and deliberate. I reached a room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open, and a dim light flickered inside. Pushing the door open, I stepped into what appeared to be a treatment room. Old medical charts and instruments were scattered across the floor, and in the center of the room was an old gurney. My flashlight fell upon a figure standing in the corner. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was a young girl, her back turned to me. Her long dark hair was matted and tangled, and she wore a tattered hospital gown. I could hear her mumbling something under her breath. "Emily?" I called out, my voice trembling. The girl turned slowly, and I was met with a pair of hollow black eyes. Her face was pale and gaunt, her expression one of pure anguish. Before I could react, the girl let out an ear-piercing scream. The room seemed to close in around me, and I felt an icy grip on my arm. I struggled to break free, but the grip tightened, pulling me towards the gurney. The room spun, and I was engulfed in darkness. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing. The room was empty, and the girl was gone. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing. I needed to get out of there. Grabbing my flashlight, I stumbled out of the room and down the hall, my mind racing with fear and confusion. As I reached the stairs, I heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me. I didn't dare look back. I ran down the stairs, nearly tripping over the broken steps, and burst through the front doors into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking, and finally managed to start the engine and drove away.